Hey there, welcome back to the channel, and today we're going to be talking to you about all the different kinds of cables that we were able to produce. So starting with one of the more popular ones, we have GM cables. Now as you can see, GM cables are rather simple. We have thread-on pieces, push-on pieces, and then transmission ends. The transmission end is almost always going to be a 7/8 18 nut. The gauge end, when talking about the GM cables, is always going to be a 5/8 18 nut. And in the cases where the gauge is a push-on, it will use one of these push-on GM ferrules. Now the tips on these are both going to be 104 square, and that's accomplished by either squaring down the physical cable like this, or by crimping on a special 104 square tip, like so. I personally don't like using tips when they're 104 square when I'm using 130 core. I prefer to swedge it down. It seems to me it's a lot easier, it's a lot cheaper, and it's a lot easier to modify if you need to do any changes. Next we have our Ford cables. For Fords we have our push-on ferrule, and then we have our little gear bullets. Depending on the transmission, you may need different lengths, but most likely you're going to need the shorter one. Some of the older and modified versions do need the longer shaft. Again, like the GM cables, the tips and ends are all 104 square, and again, you can use tips, but most likely these are just going to be squared off. Next we have our Chrysler ends. These can come in either a with clip or without clip configuration. They both, again, use 104 square ends. The transmissions I have seen over the years have done anything from the same 7/8 18 nuts as you would in GMs to sophisticated bullet systems. So we don't usually make a lot of the Chrysler stuff, but we do have a mountain of different things on hand to accommodate each kind of application. Next we come to some of our more industrial stuff. Things like Veeder-Root counter cables. We'll use 7/8 18 nuts on both sides with 1/8 tang tips, like so. Or they can be made into little extensions with a nut on one end and threads on the other. If cables were made in this configuration, this end would have a 1/8 tang tip. This side would have a female 1/8 tang tip. Further from that, we offer something also called compensating tips. And these have a tip built in, but are replaceable. The inner core is squared to 124 square, and that allows you to swap out individual tips for different size applications if you want to use the same cable over and over again. Right now this is configured to a 150 square, but I could easily swap this out for a 104 square, a 1/8 tang, even larger sizes than that, and all they do is pop in like so. One of the other variations we have are imperial or metric. The imperial stuff is either going to be 104 square, 150 square, 1/8 tang, 156 tang, 203 tang, that kind of thing. Metric tips are going to be always the little blade system. So they're either going to have a blade male tip or a blade female tip. Slide in like so, and that's it. The metric tips do not have any kind of variance of sizes like the imperial stuff do. If it's a metric size, it's going to be the paddle. Going from there, we have our different sizes of casing. We have the smaller stuff, like the 330 casing, the bigger stuff like the 445. These can either come in coated or non-coated applications as well. Sometimes we get a lot of unique cases, a lot of things that have been hobbled together kind of thing with different parts that are available. Sometimes we'll get someone with a push-on GM that needs to go into a Ford transmission. Sometimes we'll have someone with a Ford gauge that needs to go into a GM transmission. Sometimes someone also might need a Chrysler with or without the clips. Sometimes they go from with a clip to without a clip depending on the gauge swap they're doing. Sometimes if it's a change from something from Europe over to North American stuff, you'll have to switch the bottom ends from imperial to metric. Sometimes you'll even have to, instead of using 7/8 18 nuts, switch over to the metric equivalent. With regard to the inner casing, these can go anywhere from 130 core to 150 core, 187 core. They can go a lot bigger. They can also go left-hand lay, right-hand lay. Right-hand lay and left-hand lay always depend on if you're using these for automotive or industrial purposes or aeronautics. And that there is just a small sampling of the different kind of cables we are able to actually produce. We have all the little pieces downstairs in the warehouse and the expertise to know what you need and kind of figure things out for you. If you like what you see here, give this video a thumbs up, consider liking and subscribe, and as always, have a good one.